everyone. Welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruptions. You're here with me, your host, Youre. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm truly grateful. Today's episode is all about the next bump in the night. Are you prepared? With my next guest, who has more than a decade of experience in operational, financial, and strategic risk management. He was the first person to ever win the BCI's America Continuity and Resilience Consultant Award. Twice. How amazing is that? He is also a bit of a daredevil, to where he rappelled recently off the 12th floor of a local hotel to raise money for charity. And he tells me that whilst he was standing on the ledge in the rain looking down, he was questioning some of his life choices. So guys, it was with great excitement to introduce you to James Green. Hi James, how are you doing?
Good, Rina, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Fine. Welcome to the Resilience Pod.
Thank you. I'm so glad you qualified that I rappelled off a building for charity purposes and fundraising purposes, and not just because I've gone stir crazy being in my house for the last 14 months.
Yeah, I mean, some people do it for fun, but the fact that you've done that for charity is a double win. But, you are quite the daredevil, so that's quite interesting, like a risk person and a daredevil, so a lethal combination. Also, congrats on being the first ever person to win the BCI America's Consultant Award. That is pretty cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a tremendous honor. To win it one time was, I thought, the highlight of my career. And then to win it a second time, I want to just carry those two plaques around with me wherever I go. It's just really, I'm in awe based on, the people in our industry who work in the Americas in consulting. So very, very humbled to be that person.
Yes, well, great. That's great to know. And we're really excited to have this conversation because, getting into the insights of you and as the title alluded to, the next bump in the night, are you prepared? We're going to understand what that means as we go along. But the first question I have for you, and we're centered around risk management at this point. A lot of risk professionals often and seem to mitigate risks, the last known risks. Why do we always have a tendency to look backwards when we do this sort of planning?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that a lot lately in the context. I'm going to mention just COVID briefly. I know every guest brings up COVID, so we have to talk about COVID, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, please don't talk about COVID. But I will say a few things about COVID. The first is, what got me thinking about this is, I guarantee for the next 18 months, every business continuity and resilience professional that you speak to, that I speak to, will have the most beautiful pandemic plans, right? The most robust pandemic plans that we've ever seen. And so I've been thinking about, why do we do that? We are very good at mitigating the last known risk. So what goes into that? And a few things I've thought of is, first, there's recency bias, right? So last week, I have a Band-Aid on my finger. I cut my finger cooking in the kitchen. I was, I've worked in restaurants in high school, in college, and university. I know better. I was using a knife in a not smart way. I cut my finger. Stupid, minor. But what have I done every single day in the kitchen now? What am I laser focused on? My knife handling skills. I feel like I'm on, a cooking show right now in terms of how safe and secure I am holding the knife. I'm totally focused on not doing this again. But what's going to happen? I'm going to burn myself on a pan, on the oven, because I'm so focused. You have that recency bias because we have a pain point. In this case, I have a literal pain point. But I think we've just like, wow, we never want that to happen again. We just had that pain last week, last month, last year. And I think with COVID, what's going to happen, because it's a business continuity event that's stretching into month 14, that recency bias is going to stay with us a lot longer than maybe a BC incident that lasted a few hours or a few days. I think the other thing for a lot of people is it's known. That last event is known. I know I cut my finger. I don't want to do that again. So another thing I was thinking about is to solve the last known risk is really easy. So I don't know if you're a fan of, are you a fan of mystery movies?
Love them. Love it.
Puzzles? Yeah. So this weekend, my older son and I watched the movie Tenet by Christopher Nolan. I don't know if you've seen his movies or that movie in particular. It's a very, very confusing movie. And at the end, it makes sense. And you almost want to go right back and watch it again. And you're saying, oh, now I understand what's going on. Now I want to watch it again. And I think we do the same thing in risk management. Oh, I have figured out how to mitigate the risk of a false fire alarm or cutting my finger or a burst water pipe. So let's double down on continuing to focus on that because I've already solved that riddle. I've already solved that problem. Let's do that again. And then the last thing, and I'd like to get your opinions on this too, so right now up to this point, I've been saying, oh, risk management professionals, we make all these mistakes. It's all our fault. But it's not. I think the biggest driver in most organizations is management pressure. One of the reasons we're going to have the most beautiful pandemic response plans is what is management talking to us about every single day right now. You will not have another pandemic issue or right after you work with an organization that has a fire. What's management on every day? Where are we at with our fire protocols? Where are we at with our fire response? What do our alarms look like? You get hammered on that one issue. And all of us, if we want to have successful careers, we need to manage up. We need to make sure we're meeting the needs and requirements of our management. And if they're only hammering us on one thing, we're going to spend all of our time and attention on that.
So true. And I really like that you say that, because often we forget that that we're actually like just focusing on those one things and not taking a step back and like horizon scanning any risks that happen. And this is why I just wanted to kind of get straight into the question really, without really explaining why I asked that, because the risk side of it is really important in the whole resilience field. And like, we're, as professionals, we're going around identifying all those risks, trying to find the mitigations, blah blah. You guys, or you know all this stuff, so we're not going to go into the basics here, but we do tend to forget that because we're focusing on that, exactly what you said, James. And actually we need to be aware of that. And actually, if you're a risk professional and your day job is actually just doing risk management, ladies and gents, have you actually, the last week, have you done what James is saying, or have you actually taken a step back and say, what else is there? So that's really insightful to understand why we always look backwards, because it's easy to do, right? Hindsight is always easy. Yes. And it's about, I guess, on the flip side, looking forward. And from our conversations, you've always said like your concept of resilience now is that we need to look forward, because the old definition is always about bouncing back, right? And that just annoys me so much nowadays. So I want to know why you feel that the concept of resilience is about looking forward.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I chased you down and begged to be on your podcast, because I love that it's called the Resilience Pod. And I think right now in our profession, we really get hung up on terminology, right? Business continuity versus risk management versus resilience versus recovery versus pick a word. But for me, it's more of a concept. And yeah, resilience is, for me personally, the James Green definition is looking forward, because I really feel when we only look backwards, when we're only mitigating that last known risk that you and I talk about, we're guaranteed we're going to fail for the next unknown. And I'm finding, and I think we're always finding, that there is always a next unknown. That's why I call it the next bump in the night. I'm writing a book about the next bump in the night, and we really need to be prepared for that. And for me, resilience is, not ignoring the past, but how do we mitigate those risks in the past? How do we take the lessons learned from the past and put them forward? And I think the last year and a half has really allowed a lot of people and organizations to understand that there is the next bump in the night. So let's look at everything that's happened since January of 2020. If you can go back to December of 2019, like simpler times in the olden days before the world turned upside down, I've got a list over here of just trying to think of everything that's happened in a major sense since January of 2020. We had unprecedented wildfires in Australia. Then we had unprecedented wildfires in in California and parts of the United States. We've had civil unrest in the United States and really globally on a scale not seen since the 1960s. A couple of weeks ago, we inexplicably had a ship stuck sideways in the Suez Canal, disrupting the entire world's global supply chain at 10 billion US a day. We've had skyrocketing ransomware and malware. And oh, by the way, we've also had a global pandemic. Now, if you would have sat down and you would have run a tabletop exercise December of 2019 and ran all of those things as interjects, people would have got up and left the room.
Yeah. So
right.
True.
And if speaking about your manager, your boss, someone probably would have pulled you aside and said, hey, the Godzilla scenario, why are you doing this? But all these things have happened.
Yeah.
And I think not only have they all happened, we're seeing that they've happened concurrently. Somebody used the word last night, the compounding incidents. A lot of business continuity and risk management has historically mitigate one risk at a time, manage one incident at a time, and now they're compounding. Barbara Bischoff, the director of the Southeastern Caribbean Disaster Recovery Partnership, used that word with me yesterday, and I love it. And so we have these compounding incidents, and you have to be resilient, I think, to look forward. There's always going to be the next unknown, the next bump in the night. We're becoming a more tightly integrated globe. I think we've heard that term for 30 years, but now I think people are starting to see it play out. And those compounding issues are just, you don't know what's being thrown at you. And you really have to be able to, deal with Godzilla while there's a comet, while there's an earthquake, because we're now in a time right now where things are just preposterous, I think would be a good word, in terms of we would never have imagined things playing out this way.
Really insightful, James, that you say that, because even as a practitioner in this, even I've been guilty of thinking like, wow, that's just like way over the top, that's never going to happen. It's just too hard to think about these things, but actually they do happen, and they've happened all the time. I feel that just listening to you, that because we're so interconnected and like we've got the internet and social media, we're aware of these things so much more. So as a resilience professional, as a risk management professional, to simply just ignore that and then just go about the way of your business and your discipline in the most traditional senses, when we didn't have access to all this information, would be just so wrong. And it would just, the next bump in the night, well, you're not going to be prepared, are you? Because you're not even going to see it coming, or even be aware that there's things going on in other parts of the world that actually might affect you. And that's, for me, that's a good lessons learned, to actually consider that. Because when the pandemic hit, or when there's been other pandemics, it's always been, oh yeah, them, like it was in a different country. So
it's been localized.
Yeah.
I've worked on pandemics before, but like you said, it was in one country, or more specifically in one part of one country, or Hong Kong, or hyper local. So
Yeah, really, really insightful. So, guys, if you're watching or listening, are you prepared for the next bump in the night? Do you even know what that's going to be for you and your business? Or are you just sitting there looking at the last known risks and not forward thinking? Let me know. And if you're shy or you don't want to admit it, that's fine. If you've got, it's all about the awareness. So, I'd really love to hear from you, and so would James, about what you think is going to be the next bump in the night too, because that's always an interesting
Absolutely.
interesting.
I would love to know what your audience is thinking about, where my blind spots are, what they're thinking about. That'd be fantastic. Absolutely.
Fab. So guys, do let us know. Now, James, we've talked about how we as risk professionals always mitigate the last known risks, the concept of resilience about looking forward so you can identify the next bump in the night. How that I want to know the how now. So how can we go away and look forward? And it might seem like an obvious thing, but actually it's harder to visualize and conceptualize that. So I'm really keen to understand what some of your tips would be to share with all of us to help us become that little bit more resilient.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because a lot of times talking head like me just says, oh, just be resilient, just go off and magically let me sprinkle you with some fairy dust and now you can
Yeah.
fly, now you can be resilient. But how does that help people? Like, how do we actually get there? So I was thinking
Yeah.
about some things, and some of them are macro and micro level. So hopefully between a few things, we'll find some good takeaways. I think the first thing for me is that we as professionals, as an organization, and as the organization that you work for, we need to be strategic. So this sounds obvious,
Yeah.
but bear with me. A lot of mistakes that I've seen organizations make the last 2 or 3 years, they've been tactical mistakes. They haven't been strategic mistakes. So again, when you are James Green resilient, when you are looking at the next bump in the night, since you don't know exactly what it is, you want to have the strategies in place. You want to have the teams in place, the people in place. So whether it's an E. coli outbreak or a Godzilla, your people can respond, your company can respond. I think a mistake that a lot of people made, they had all these different plans.
Yeah.
And then what happens when there's a global pandemic? What happens when there's civil unrest and you don't have a plan for that? So for me, resilience, how is to start being strategic. Now, I'm not saying ignore everything you're doing tactically, but that shouldn't be all that you do. The tactics should be the base, the strategy should be the top. And I think it kind of bleeds into the next item I've been thinking about. You want to work to make sure that risk management as a function, resilience as a function, and you as a risk management professional are relevant to management, are relevant to the business. I've written about this. I've gotten hate mail about this, but I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's really important. We have seen over the last 2 years, a lot of business continuity and risk management professionals get marginalized in their organization. And it's not because they're not quality people. It's because they haven't connected with management. You need to know what management's pain points are and how you're working to alleviate those pain points. Just providing reports to management right now in the era of 5 different compounding events is not enough. So I think that's really important. And by being strategic, you're found more valuable by management. And that also, I think, helps with the next thing is you need to permeate the culture of an organization, which is one of the hardest things I've ever done or seen done. How do you make the culture of an organization risk aware? But that is, again, how you are resilient. When the whole organization is mindful of risk, you can manage that next bump in the night. And we've seen whole organizations be mindful of safety, right? Of health, of compliance. So there is a way to get there, but I think that's a really key thing. Is your organization aware of risk? Do you have a risk culture? Because people will help you identify that next bump in the night when it's only an emerging risk, when it's still small and you can do something about it. When you don't have that culture, I think a lot of times you see the risk when it's too late.
Yeah. I love the fact that all these tips, these 3 tips, tie into one another. And the one that's the hero for me is, well, what you said about, well, the organizations are all aware of a health and safety culture. And that just, for me, that just hit the nail on the head. And that means it's doable. If people can be mindful of that, why can't they be mindful of risk, of continuity, of crisis, or whatever? And guys, this you need to take a note of these things, because this is the key in helping you think strategically, and being aware of that and embedding that culture. This is so insightful, James, and it feels like, wow, actually this is quite doable. I could go away in my organization and do this.
Yeah, I think that the thing to remember is it to become a resilient organization is a journey, and you probably never get to that final step, but you start somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. We've got to start somewhere.
One of the things, and some of the challenges, I guess, some of the listeners or viewers might have, is that they're only restricted to doing certain things. Like, this is your remit, you can only do this. So trying to think strategically and see the pain points of your leadership, you're kind of like 10 levels removed from someone who's at the top and bottom. And that's what we find, especially as a new practitioner, quite hard to do. But it's about that understanding, isn't it? Like, do you have a tip for someone who might be struggling to do this, how they can start doing this?
Yeah, so certainly if you're a new practitioner, or if you're in a company with 100,000 employees, I've been there, and you're head of BC and maybe you're 27 layers down, you can still figure out what management pain point are. Most people are very receptive to skip level meetings or meeting with someone in their organization if they know ahead of time why. Like, I know if I receive an email from someone who says, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time? And the key is not just, can I have 15 minutes of your time? Can I have 15 minutes of your time because I want to better understand the stressors and struggles that you face as a leader in our organization? Most people are going to take that meeting. So at the very least, you can be, even if you can't directly affect that change in the beginning, to your point, you're at least aware of where leadership is stressful. And the second thing you can do, certainly at any level, is another miss I see: does the culture of your risk or business continuity program fit the culture of the organization? So if you are a very serious organization and very by the book, I work with some defense contractors in the United States where they love binders and stacks of stuff and diagrams. Do that. I work for an organization currently, Origami Risk. We are a very playful environment, very, I wouldn't say silly, but there's a lot of humor that happens in our Slack channels. So the first time I presented to the whole company, my presentation had 2 memes in there. I would never do that in another company, but I knew the culture of my company. So does your presentation style, does your approach to risk management and resilience fit the culture of the company? That's something that you can do at any level of an organization and anywhere experience. So if you're 20, 30 years in, or you're just starting out, really think about what is the culture and style of your company, and is what you're doing fit into that?
That is key. If you take anything away from this episode, you need to take that thing away. And it's about adapting yourself, because one size really doesn't fit all. And if you've been doing this for quite some time and you're quite seasoned, you should really know this. And if you don't, that's okay, because you're listening or watching us, so you do know this now. And that's how you change it. And everything you've said, James, I find really relatable, because actually I think about how I've done this in organizations I've worked for, and it's been exactly the same way. It's transforming a culture is really hard, but it's adapting to the style that suits the other person, at individual level as well as a wider level. So I really like that you said that, because sometimes when you're doing these things, you just think, oh, is it just me that's doing it, or is it like a common thing? So really insightful there. Thanks for that. Now, this episode has been really insightful, and as we come to a close and just gather our thoughts, is there anything else and final closing remarks that you would like to share with our audience, and some key takeaways?
Yeah, I really think, like I said earlier, resilience is a journey, and that's a very hackneyed phrase, and I cringe while it's coming out of my mouth saying that, but it really is. You're not going to be resilient overnight. You're never going to mitigate all risk to zero. So just start wherever you are in an organization, or wherever you are in your journey of experience. Control what you can control. Start with that. Be mindful always of the bigger picture within your organization, and just keep moving forward, and certainly reach out. Like, I've learned so much through my connections in BCI. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have met all these people. We're all here to help each other. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions, because there's not a lot of textbooks for this. There's certainly no guideline for the next bump in the night. So we're all here. We're a very tight-knit profession, which is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it. Control what you can control. Be mindful of management and culture, and reach out and ask questions, and get help, and also help people. So
fabulous. Thank you, James, for sharing this insights and actually making us think about these things. It's been truly a pleasurable experience having you on the Resilience Pod.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in today, whether you listened to us or watched. If you like this, then comment down below and like and share far and wide, and let me know your thoughts. Let James know your thoughts. If you don't agree with him, let us know. Either way, we like a debate here. And always think about how these things can actually add value as well to your sides of the organization. So once again, thank you to James. And guys, a final question from me is, after listening to all this, are you prepared for the next bump in the night? So this is me, your host, Rina Singh, with James Green on the Resilience Pod, saying bye for now, and keep on investing in your resilience.